Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Monday, December the 21st, 2021. Let's start with education, as in who needs it? Apparently, not the children of the province of Ontario. This is from James Anthony at the Post Millennial. Ontario court declares math proficiency test unconstitutional. And why is it unconstitutional according to the Ontario Divisional Court? Due to concerns about it being racially biased. The test in question has been administered to prospective teachers in the province of Ontario as part of their ongoing certification process. The court has ruled that the Ontario College of Teachers shall grant certification to teacher candidates who have not yet passed the math proficiency test, but who have otherwise met all other teacher certification requirements. Yes, math, officially now surplus to requirements. According to the Ontario Teachers Federation, the court found that the test, quote, had an adverse impact on entry to the teaching profession for racialized teacher candidates, and other reasonable alternatives should have been implemented. OTF applauds the efforts of the Ontario Teacher Candidates Council for pursuing this successful legal challenge. There is no research to suggest that a standardized test would improve student outcomes or enhance teacher pedagogy. Ontario has some of the best educated teachers in the world, and this decision reinforces their professionalism, according to OTF President Chris Cowley. Some of the best teachers in the world, they're just not so good at math. The full 37-page court decision has been posted online. Where exactly they found in the Canadian Constitution that the province of Ontario doesn't get to test for proficiency in math for teachers is an interesting question, but we know that they just make it up. Jonathan Kay of Quillette, formerly of the National Post, tweeted, Ontario Teachers Union very excited that its members won't have to know math. Another great day for Ontario students. Previously, even the math curriculum in Ontario has come under criticism from woke critics who have called the subject itself Eurocentric, claiming that it, quote, normalizes racism, unquote. The grade 9 curriculum for Ontario's math program was found in July to depict math as a subjective method that reinforces Eurocentric mathematical knowledge, per the Ontario government's website. Well, it seems to be too much for the Ontario government and its Department of Education to run schools. So how about they just rebate the per capita cost to parents, and then they can do with the money as they see fit. This is another example of how diversity, multiculturalism et al. Are a disaster. It's not enough that we suck up to these people, and how may we help you? No. Math in Ontario schools must be destroyed because a certain group or groups of people coming to Ontario, so-called racialized people, hate white people. They hate European civilization, science, etc. In other Canadian news, this is from Mia Rabson at the Canadian Press. Oh yes, that fellow with the hideously ugly beard, Minister of Environment and Climate Change, Stephen Guilbeault. It's the end of days for grocery bags, plastic grocery bags and styrofoam take-up containers in Canada, but the products can still be manufactured for export. Guilbeault published draft regulations Tuesday outlining how Canada will ban the manufacture, sale, and import of these items, along with plastic cutlery, stir sticks, straws, and six-pack rings by the end of next year. The regulations outline how each of the products is to be defined. Plastic bags, for example, are those made of plastic film, which will break or tear if used to carry 10 kilograms over a certain distance. Oh, are there going to be testing of this? Cutlery includes forks, knives, spoons, sporks, and chopsticks that will start to melt if immersed in hot but not boiling water. There are some exceptions for single-use plastic flexible straws to accommodate people with, wait for it, disabilities and those needing them for medical purposes. Uh, Plastic bags are a marvel of engineering, and I don't use that word lightly. Uh, they are much better than their so-called ecologically friendly alternatives. And if you want more information about this, you should go to the Twitter feed of a fellow called Tim Newman, and he is at White Sun Desert. He has gone into this at great length. Aside from plastic bags being better for the environment, oh, yes, the oceans are being polluted with plastic bags. We are not the people polluting the oceans with plastic bags. Also, these reusable bags, they are bacteria traps, as was noted by, I believe, the Washington Post, as far back as 5 years ago. I believe that. But no, plastic, mankind's eternal enemy, just like carbon, must be dealt with. Let's have a look at the chat. Hello to Anran Yomama, who says, I discovered an indie Christian movie with Gavin MacLeod and Trime Tavel. Hello to Dan Gamian, William Hicks, Popcasu 88. How is this? Brights in Slavu Orsh. I can't pronounce that. Gameston. Another day, another who racialized you. Hello to Teleologic Jones. Thank you for your kind words. Your mama says Mike Judge never saw the woke idiocracy coming. Chogokin 666 says, I heard Nabisco hired a ghetto youth to goon against the striking workers. Math be white, says Chogokin 666. Texas Feral Hawk says the Canadian Constitution was written in European languages. The Constitution is itself unconstitutional. Is styrofoam toxic like microplastics or not really, says Gamiston. William Hicks has a quotation from White House COVID czar Zientz. For the unvaccinated, you're looking at a winter of severe illness and death for yourselves, your families, and the hospitals you may soon overwhelm. Yes, the Biden White House said it, then this Zientz fellow, and I'm thinking, is that a threat or a promise? Popcasso 88 says in grade 10 and 11 English, my teacher would read Stephen King aloud for the first half of class because she thought he was the greatest living writer in English. This was 1992 to 93. Golly, I hope that this woman did not read the infamous underage gangbang scene in It. That could have been traumatizing. Chokin 666 points out, I see discarded masks all over the place. Yes, and they are polluting the ocean. Justin Proto says Hitler only used sporks. Think about it. Biological Fukushima incoming, says Dan. Let's move on to that because we have reached another level of, well, no, we're not quite there yet. Let's talk about the United States military. This is an article from American Thinker by someone who rejoices in the nom de plume wolf howling. Democrats claim that democracy is under attack in America, and Democrats must act decisively to protect it. They've been trying to end the filibuster, nationalize voting, and pack the Supreme Court. The most ominous fix, which hinges on the myth of a January 6th insurrection, sees retired generals argue that the military must purge the ranks of Trump supporters and prepare for a military coup to block a future contested election. This is unconstitutional, illegal, and spells the end of American democracy. And this is in reference to a piece in the Washington Post by three retired generals, Paul Eaton, Antonio Taguba, and Stephen Anderson. Oh, yes, the insurrection. And the military, if this is a preemptive coup, as far as I can see what they're talking about. That the generals, they must move in, I suppose, something clearly undemocratic and illegal like Trump being reelected could happen, because the Democrats and their supporters, the elite, have taken the position, which they hold seriously, that it's not democracy if we lose. That's simple. Miriam Godwinson, Respecter 40K, on Twitter, says, the gracious comrade Stalin sent me this article, and I have to say that it is a doozy. Given that he and I have been writing about these issues for a bit, I'll give my own political side, not military side, view of what's written. And this would be at Tink Zorg. First off, these people are not just random op-ed writers. They are retired flag rank officers, 1 brigadier general and 2 major generals. Second, what they write here is worth quite a few raised eyebrows. It's a pretty radical piece. Put simply, the writers identify the lower ranks of the U.S. Armed Services as being, not to beat around the bush here, catastrophically unreliable. They start by talking about the demographic makeup of the J6 protest, but that's not necessarily the biggest mic drop. This is pointing out that arms might not be secured as a potential risk scenario is pretty amazing. These generals are saying that in the case of any sort of legitimacy crisis, the armed forces cannot be relied on to make sure that weapon systems don't end up missing. Other people are far more informed on the logistics of this than me, but I'll just say that there are a lot of man-portable weapon systems that could do truly horrible damage if they end up in the wrong hands. Man-pads, handheld AT, stuff like that. A scenario of weapons going missing doesn't have to mean people stealing tanks or ships or whatever to be a really bad scenario. Missing grenades and plastic explosives is enough of disaster on its own. The real thing to keep in mind here is just what arms might not be secured actually means on a political level. This speaks to a real fear of near total institutional failure on the part of the military in crisis. The authors point to the governor of Oklahoma firing the commander of the state National Guard and putting his own man in place in order to defy Pentagon's COVID mandates. Then they say that rogue units organizing among themselves is a real possibility in crisis. Let's put that in plain English. These generals are worried about unit-level mutiny, that is, entire military units, such as a company or a regiment, reaching internal consensus and deciding to support the other team in a potential political conflict. That right there is basically the single worst disaster a political regime can suffer. Once unit-level mutinies are a thing, you are almost certainly headed for civil war. That there is an opinion piece written by flag officers in the Washington Post warning of this is quite shocking. What might be more important than this from a political perspective is, however, that the cupboard seems pretty darn bare in terms of actual realistic solutions. These generals have some suggestions, but they shouldn't exactly inspire a lot of confidence. The first suggestion is just to prosecute all the rabble-rousers and politicians who inspired January the 6th. This is not going to happen, and even if it did, it would likely just make polarization worse in the short and medium term. Moreover, who are you going to prosecute? Trump, Josh Hawley, Ted Cruz, people at American Greatness, Ron DeSantis? Whatever one thinks about J6, it didn't happen due to the actions of a few specific demagogues who can somehow be isolated. The polarization in America is general and severe, cutting the country in two. Yes, and this was written on December the 18th, which I guess was, or published on December the 18th, which was just about the time or the day before that the White House pretty much issued a death threat to half of America. And again, that's at Tink Zorg. There is a piece here at CSPI, cspicenter.org, by Philippe Lemoine called "Will Zemmour Bring a Right-Wing Revolution in France?" Excuse me. If you follow politics even a little bit, you must have heard of Éric Zemmour, the former right-wing pundit who is running for president in France and who is now a senior contender for the second round of the election. Everyone thought the results of the April 2022 election were written in advance, with a second round between Macron and Le Pen. By the way, there is a rumor flashed around France last week that France's first lady, or whatever you call her, apparently is suing over. Not a wise idea, in my opinion, because in cases like this, it just means that more people have heard the rumor or defamatory statement And since this statement must be silenced, more people are going to believe it. Well, the rumor is that Mademoiselle Macron was actually born a man. Zemmour's entry into the race, Lemoine continues, and his rise in the polls suddenly make this campaign very interesting. Unless he collapses in the coming month, which I doubt, you're probably going to hear a lot more about him soon, so I figured it might be useful to write a short post explaining who he is and what he wants and give some context that people not familiar with French politics might lack. I'm going to briefly present his background, platform, strengths, and weaknesses and explain what his victory would entail and to what extent the comparisons people make with Trump are sensible. Eric Zemmour was born in 1958 to Jewish parents who had recently moved to France from Algeria, still a French colony at the time. It's not really correct to speak of Algeria as a French colony. Algeria was an integral part of France. He was born in a suburb near Paris, a city that is home to a large share of African and North African immigrants, but despite what I often hear, he is not himself an immigrant since he was born in France to French parents. However, it's true that he is not of European descent, so he is not a Français de souche. He became a journalist in the 1980s and started covering national politics in 1996 for Le Figaro, France's main right-wing newspaper. He was kind of Christopher Hitchens, according to Lemoine. He was no longer just a political journalist, but also and even mainly a cultural critic. In 2006, he wrote a book against the feminization of society under the title The First Sex, in reference to Simone de Beauvoir's famous book, which became a bestseller and horrified a lot of feminists. In that work, he explicitly defended the patriarchal model, something that was very controversial even in France and would be unimaginable in the United States. He wrote several other bestsellers after that in which he revisited French history and denounced France's decline. He was fired several times from the TV shows and radio stations where he worked, but since he was very good for ratings, he would immediately be hired somewhere else. In 2011, he was found guilty of incitement to racial hatred by a court for saying that blacks and Arabs were stopped by the police more often because most drug traffickers are black or Arab, which is probably true. But this didn't do anything to make him less popular. He was convicted again in 2018 for incitement toward religious hatred. Well, you may have seen that last week Zemmour said there is no such thing as trans kids. And someone asked, can you imagine anyone in the GOP saying this? He also spoke to a woman from Cape Verde, a cabinet minister, and it looked like she was going to burst into tears when he said that I'm not a fearmonger. People are afraid, and I'm the only one who recognizes their fear of the great replacement. Yeah, he actually uses that term. Zemmour doesn't merely use anti-immigration rhetoric because it's popular among voters. He is a true believer. However, although he opposes immigration, despite what many people say, he doesn't have a racial conception of Frenchness, which indeed would be rather weird since he is of non-European descent. He thinks that anyone can be French, no matter their background, but that being French involves adopting French culture and not just having French citizenship. He often criticizes people who claim that in order to be French, one just has to adhere to human rights and a few other abstract principles. Yes, the proposition nation, as they call it in the United States. And of course, pretty much all so-called conservatives in the United States and Canada, for that matter, are proposition people. Apart from immigration, Zemmour is a traditional conservative on most issues, but unlike most conservative politicians who are far more liberal than their voters and say a lot of things they don't really mean to get their votes when they're running for office, there can be no doubt that he truly believes what he says, because he was already saying the same things before he decided to run for president. He is openly and stridently anti-woke, wants to remove what he calls alphabet people ideology from schools, and return to traditional pedagogy, which I suppose also includes the teaching of math. Increase the number of places in prison and the severity of sentences, etc. Well, in the past, he has expressed somewhat heterodox views on economics. He is running on a very traditional French right-wing platform, pro-capitalism without being a libertarian. His views on foreign policy are more original. He is openly a proponent of realpolitik and says that France should talk to everyone, including China and Russia. He is very critical of people who argue that we shouldn't negotiate with them because they violate human rights. Again, there is no doubt he sincerely believes that, because this is something he's been saying for years. He also said that he thinks NATO should have been dismantled after the USSR collapsed, but has only proposed that France leave the organization's integrated command, not that it leave NATO altogether. What is his strategy, and does he have a chance? Zemmour has been very explicit about his strategy, so we don't really have to guess, but in order to understand it, you need to know a few things about French political history. Up until the 1980s, the French Socialist Party was a working-class movement. François Mitterrand, the first socialist to become president in France, was elected in 1981 on a platform that included the nationalization of many branches of industry. He actually implemented this platform after his election, but it was a disaster, and he soon had to choose between his socialist economic policy and European integration, because continuing with this policy would have required that France leave the European monetary system. In 1983, he chose the latter, but this decision created a serious political problem for him. Indeed, if the Socialist Party was no longer socialist on the economy, it needed something to mobilize voters against the right. The solution was to pivot from a party that was focused on improving the material conditions of the working class to a party that was focused on social issues, and in particular on defending immigrants, who gradually replaced the working class in left-wing mythology. Luckily for Mitterrand, at the same time, the National Front, Jean-Marie Le Pen's far-right party, was beginning to rise, and its leader was the perfect bogeyman. At first, traditional right-wing leaders did not consider the National Front to be toxic and even made alliances with it occasionally in local elections. But as it turned out, Mitterrand was really smart, and traditional right-wing leaders were really stupid. Mitterrand very intelligently used his influence to simultaneously give more visibility to Le Pen by getting him invited on national television, and also demonize him by supporting various anti-racist activist groups to make him a pariah by pretending that he was a fascist. So, can he win? I can assure you, says Le Moine, that if you had told anyone 6 months ago, including people in Zemmour's campaign, that he'd be at 12 to 15% of the polls in December, no one would have believed you. Some people think that he's going to crash in the next few weeks, but while it's possible, I doubt it's going to happen, because he now seems to have a solid base of people who tell pollsters they are sure to vote for him. Only Le Pen and Macron do better than him in that respect. It's true that after rising incredibly fast in the polls, he started going down about a month ago, but it looks as though he managed to stop the fall. The first round of the election will be decided by the people who hesitate between Zemmour, Le Pen, and Pécresse, the candidate of the Republicans, the traditional right-wing party, who recently had a jump in the polls after she won the nomination. However, I personally think Pécresse is going to fall in the polls next year because she is basically a female version of Macron, and people will prefer the original to the copy. Whether Zemmour can make it to the second round will depend on a few things. First, as I noted above, Zemmour has a similar problem with women as Trump, but it's actually a bigger problem for him. Indeed, in the case of Trump, it was compensated by the fact that he was running in a two-party system. So with polarization, many women wouldn't have voted for Trump, otherwise ended up voting for him anyway, because he wasn't a Democrat. In France, right-wing women have other options, so Zemmour will have to improve his image among women if he wants to have a chance. Well, it's funny that Le Moine says that, because all of the smart people, and you will remember this in 2016, said that after their surreptitiously recorded remarks, or the conversation between Billy Bush and Trump on Access Hollywood, that Trump was finished, because the way that he described women, or certain women, well, it turned out that he got a majority. How about that? Certainly amongst white women. And I don't know that Trump, it seems to me, made it respectable again to be manly, if you will, even unto what they call toxic masculinity. Let's go back to the chat. Hello to Tim Humphreys. Jim Bowden says Luke Ford is currently in Queensland. He loves the jab and the mask. Uh, I told him, said Jim Bowden, get married and have lots of little Lukes running around. I think it may be too late. Otherwise, a very pleasant, reasonably well-read man. Yeah, I don't know. I would have thought that if Luke Ford wanted to get married, he would be married by now. Okay, I saw that we finally got one death from the Omicron variant. It's not democracy if we lose was literally what the Spanish left said when they lost the election in 34. It says, yo, mama. Mask wearing in summer weather is quite surprising, says Tim Humphries. Yes, I should mention this. I was outside today, and, it is cold. It's cold for Victoria, British Columbia, not cold for most of the United States. More than half the people that I saw on the streets were wearing masks. And I just, what is wrong with you people? What is wrong with you people? Do you have any idea how vast the atmosphere is? And okay, so let's go to the Drudge Report. And oh my God, the darkest day. Oh, and yes, it has a dual meaning. The first day of winter. I was tipped off by the picture of Stonehenge. And of course, Omicron. Omicron sweeps across nations. Texas records first death in USA. Humanized mice provide clue to why hits some harder than others. Chicago to require proof of vaccination. Boston lines up mandates. Virus fears widen. Biden exposed. 10% positive on Miami flight. SpaceX outbreak leaves 132 sick. New Jersey schools prep to close. Massachusetts activates troops. Even Fox News requiring shots. Fauci calls for hope. I'll talk about that later. O'Reilly, I had to console Trump after MAGA booed booster. Long COVID, no such thing. Patients report vibrations. Ooh, tremors. Stop dishing out pills for depression, doctors told. Physicians overwhelmed by visits from frequent attenders. What does that mean, frequent attenders? People who go to the doctor a lot? This is from Study Finds. Is there such a thing as going to the doctor too much? A new study finds family doctors are being overwhelmed by frequent attenders who visit their practices 5 times more than other patients. Researchers from the University of Manchester say these individuals make up around 4 in every 10 consultations. This isn't a new trend either. The proportion of medical regulars has soared in the past 2 decades, years before the emergence of COVID-19. The findings explain the rise in workloads for general practitioners, with half believing the situation is risky. Evelyn Waugh, his grandfather was a general practitioner. And like all doctors, there were frequent attenders, probably because they're lonely old people with no one to talk to. So Waugh's grandfather came up with this patent mixture, which he called the mixture, which he would dole out to people who attended his surgery frequently. And there were 2 versions of it. For the nice patients, there was a sweet tasting liquid. And for the nasty patients, there was a nasty tasting liquid. And here's a picture of Santa Claus wearing those plastic shields over his head and very strange glasses. Another COVID Christmas. New York smashes case record 4th July. Biden coughs through COVID address. Israel getting 4th shot. But we knew that was coming, right? We knew that was coming. And apparently, leading doctor in Israel says there's going to be a 5, a 6, and a 7 as well. I love this should have been the number 1 story last week because it's rather shocking. It's not shocking if you know about modelers. I don't mean people who, build, World War II planes or whatever, miniature versions. I mean scientific, mathematical modelers. This is from the National, the newspaper that supports an independent Scotland. BBC criticized over interview with Spectator editor about COVID modeling. And apparently, one of the reasons that this BBC was criticized is because Fraser Nelson, who is the editor of The Spectator, is a unionist. What that could possibly have to do with what he would say about COVID modeling is an interesting question. The BBC has been criticized after the editor of The Spectator, Fraser Nelson, questioned scientific modeling given to the UK government while appearing on Good Morning Scotland. It followed a Twitter exchange over the weekend between the journalist and the chair of the Scientific Pandemic Influenza Group on modeling of the Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies, SAGE, Graham Medley, about the modeling on potential scenarios of the spread of the coronavirus, especially about the rapid spread of the Omicron variant. The exchange came out of a long thread that mentioned the Spectator's graphs that show SAGE modeling against the results of what happened with COVID case numbers and deaths following governments opposing restrictions. Yes, in other words, Neil Ferguson is wrong about everything and has been wrong, disastrously wrong, for decades, but never mind that. Medley had been making the point that the scenarios that scientists model are not predictions of what will happen, but are made to support a decision to illustrate the possibilities and uncertainty. Yes, Nelson had asked, I guess the question is why LSHTM did not, like JP Morgan, include a scenario of lower virulence, given that this is a very plausible option that changes outlook massively. Nelson, yes. The contentious point came when Medley told Nelson that his team generally modeled what we are asked to model by those setting government policy, with a dialogue about what would be best to inform decisions. In other words, is it time to panic now? Yes, it is. We have models. Nelson then appeared on the BBC's Good Morning Scotland program Tuesday, where he further questioned why best case scenarios are not included. The journalist's name was trending on Twitter after the interview, with many asking why he was asked on the program to discuss epidemiology and why he was not challenged on the points he was making. So, lead modeler with the UK government essentially says garbage in, garbage out, and it's Fraser Nelson who is being controversial. And let's see if there's any update from Fraser Nelson on this. He's taken the criticism pretty well, I must say. Better than I would, because it is so obviously hypocritical. The Spectator tweeted, I've been working at the BBC News throughout the COVID era and have witnessed how the insatiable demands of the 24-hour news cycle have exacerbated a serious and protracted crisis. And, okay. Why Liz Truss's new Brexit rule, something to do with Taylor Swift. All right. I know that, with Taylor Swift, she influences everything now. I mean, her importance in our culture cannot be overstated. I'm not sure even Nicola Sturgeon could credit government action for all 9 SAGE summer reopening scenarios not coming to pass. All 9 SAGE summer reopening scenarios not coming to pass. And the modeling that's being done for Australia now is simply bonkers. Here's something from Michael Simmons. Hospitalizations continuing to rise in London, but on the 19th, nearly a third of new hospital cases had been in hospital for more than a week already, i.e., they were incidental admissions. When we hear about hospitals being overwhelmed and ICUs being overwhelmed, well, when a large number of the people who were in the hospitals and the ICUs were not admitted for treatment of COVID symptoms, but for other things, heart disease, stroke, high blood pressure, cancer, prostate disease, whatever, then obviously this inflates the danger of COVID. And William Briggs the statistician to the stars, does some gloating about this. We're almost always right, they're almost always wrong, yet they're always believed. Corona doom update. And 111. Before we begin our main update, Briggs writes, allow me to congratulate myself. Michael Sanger had tweeted a jaw-dropping exchange between Spectator editor Fraser Nelson and Graham Medley, in which Medley admits outcomes not requiring restrictions are systematically omitted from SAGE's models. A screenshot of the picture, in case it disappears, is here. I've said it 100 times or more that all models only say what they are told to say. Here is a formal paper on the subject, and here is an instructional video. If a model is told to say lockdowns work, it will and must conclude lockdowns work. But this model is not independent evidence or proof lockdowns work. Lockdowns work was an assumption. It remains an assumption. Replace lockdowns with whatever solutions you like, same thing. At least we have an expert admitting these simple and indeed indisputable facts. If you saw yesterday the definition of an expert in expertocracy, you will understand. Longtime readers will also know that I've warned about trumpeting cases, that cases are not cases, that cases are fake and gay, that nobody should talk about cases because cases only generates needless fear. For instance, from disclose.tv, New York reports the highest one-day increase of COVID-19 cases on record. New York is the highest vaccination rate among the most populous states in the U.S. Briggs comments, oh my, cases. What about something that really matters? Deaths. Oh, and what were the number of deaths in New York State on December the 18th? 0. 7-day average, 13. The Secretary of Health and Human Services says we're getting to the point now where it's about severity. It's not about cases. Oh, a bit late in the day, but certainly glad to hear it. And, the word is penalties will be coming to unvaccinated Americans. I don't know what these punishments for failure to obey will be, says Briggs, but my guess is vaccine slave badges for travel. Show your papers or no airplanes or trains. Your papers are not in order. But these punishments would not start until after New Year's Day, which would instantly disprove the science behind them, because if they work, they should be used immediately. I have been warning us since late summer that, as always happens, death would begin creeping up in fall, peaking in January, as always. I warned us to get ready for it, as our arrogant masters and experts, loath to admit error, would mandate yet again all the solutions that failed before. They, on the other hand, assured us often and loudly and with force their solutions, including the VEX, would be 100% effective. Now, of course, that turned out to be not correct. And the numbers in Ontario, in Alberta, are just becoming ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. Let's see what Jim Kunstler had to say about this yesterday. He has a piece called The Omicron Fake Out. My guess is that Americans, by and large, cherish Christmas more than they fear the latest COVID-19 government-sponsored terror campaign, and that the globalist tyrants, or whatever you want to call them, behind Joe Biden have now gone too far. Omicron is all they have left, and it's not much to work with. Spreads easily, mild presentation, immunizes naturally. What's not to like about this variant of SARS-CoV-2? Kind of looks like an off-ramp from the COVID-19 mass formation psychosis nightmare. So, of course, the last thing the authorities want is an end to the pandemic panic. The emergency self-authorized President Anthony Fauci was all over cable news Sunday night with dire warnings about a winter of death. We have a tough few months ahead, he warned. Get boosted. A CNN blonde told the nation the case for boosters has never been stronger. Is that so? Kunstler responds. Omicron supposedly started in South Africa some weeks ago, and COVID deaths there are at an 18-month low. The existing vaccines appear to be completely ineffective against Omicron. So how is more of that stuff going to help? And then why all the hysteria about vaxing up the vax resident, insofar as the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines present not insignificant risks, plus being ineffective? What is the prudent bet there? Why is there absolutely no talk, except in the state of Florida, about comprehensive early treatment of COVID? Yes. No, we can't treat it. Well, why not? Anytime, something new comes along, what do we have on the shelf that could possibly be useful? We can't do that this time. Why not? Because Fauci says so. Oh, okay. All right. Kunstler continues with the apparent defeat of the Build Back Better boondoggle. Following a long list of other failures, the Joe Biden regime's main chance for retaining any power is to keep the COVID panic going long enough to rerun the mail-in voting of 2020 in the 2022 congressional elections. It's a weak play, though, since the opposition is fully on to it. Anyway, that election is a long ways away while events are moving fast and furiously. Chiefly, the regime's favorite narratives are falling apart, along with its poll numbers and the collapsing economy. Joe Biden is programmed to make a pitch for Christmas lockdowns Tuesday night, but did he do that? I don't think so. Let's go, Brandon. One useful idea floating around the internet lately is for a nationwide general strike to take place on January 4th, the first back-to-work day after the holiday. It's simple. Don't show up for work and don't spend a nickel. The message will be just stop it. Stop the coercion, stop the lying, stop the shenanigans. If that event comes off, a lot of people will be free for the day, maybe a few days, to take to the streets and demonstrate their principled opposition to illegitimate political leadership. Joe Biden and company will jump up and down, calling it another insurrection. And guess what? No one will believe them. Okay. This is from CNBC. This was written ahead of the speech. The Biden administration will deploy 1,000 medical personnel from the military to back up hospitals if they face a wave of Omicron patients. The White House is also purchasing 500 million at-home COVID tests that Americans can order for free through a website starting in January. Yes, and that will result in more cases, a great many of which will be false positives. And in Canada, the COVID hysterics have been screaming, testing, testing, testing. We need rapid testing. We need it. We're demanding rapid testing right now. So the rapid testing starts to be doled out. And then they start saying, oh, you can't really trust the results because, it's maybe not going to show up until, a few days after the test. Then why are you asking for the tests? The CDC reported that Omicron is rapidly spreading, is now the dominant variant, representing 73% of U.S. cases. And I can only see that as good news. If no one is dying, if hardly anyone's getting sick, and we're getting immunity from it, that's good, right? This is from Oliver Darcy, that creep at CNN. And I'm looking at a picture here of another creep, Anthony Fauci, who on Tuesday said that Fox News host Jesse Waters should be fired for using violent language at a conservative conference to encourage attendees to conduct an ambush with interview with him. That's what it reads. I'm not misreading this in hopes of creating a viral moment. I mean, that's crazy, Fauci added. The guy should be fired on the spot. Fox News, after reading, said, based on watching the full clip and reading the entire transcript, it's more than clear that Jesse Waters was using a metaphor for asking hard-hitting questions to Dr. Fauci about gain-of-function research, and his words have been twisted completely out of context. Now you go in for the kill shot. The kill shot with an ambush deadly because he doesn't see it coming, Waters said. Yeah, he was using metaphors. Many, many military metaphors have been used over the last 2 years with regard to COVID, but that's different because the good guys are using them. I mean, when the White House was talking about, the winter of, massive death or whatever, that didn't sound like a metaphor to me. Speaking of Dr. Fauci, or the science, as we like to call him, this is by Deborah Heine at American Greatness. Last fall, outgoing National Institutes of Health Director Francis Collins asked Fauci in an email to pursue a quick and devastating media hit piece to discredit the Great Barrington Declaration, recently released emails show. More than 60,000 infectious disease epidemiologists and public health scientists signed the declaration to express their grave concern about the damaging physical and mental health impacts of the prevailing COVID-19 policies. The document was authored by Dr. Martin Kulldorff, a professor of medicine at Harvard, Dr. Sunitra Gupta, a professor at Oxford, and Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, a professor at Stanford Med School in Great Barrington, Massachusetts. All three of the doctors are epidemiologists with expertise in monitoring infectious diseases. This proposal from three fringe epidemiologists who met with the secretary seems to be getting a lot of attention, and even a co-signature from Nobel Prize winner Mike Leavitt at Stanford, Collins wrote in the October 8th, 2020 email. There needs to be a quick and devastating published takedown of its premises, the NIH chief continued. I don't see anything like that online yet. Is it underway? How many times have Fauci and Collins been wrong? Has there been any devastating takedowns of them? I mean, Fauci still has his job. And here's a piece from Frank Faridi at Spiked Online. Public health dominates political discussion today. Max vaccines, social distancing, these are the issues about which we now argue daily. Not economics or the increasingly volatile geopolitical situation, but public health. And I'm not just talking about the COVID pandemic. Indeed, virtually all aspects of social and political life today are now framed through the idiom of public health. Problems we used to treat as political and social questions are now often presented as medical issues. So critics of Prime Minister Boris Johnson do not simply question his political record. They also brand him a public health problem. As one article puts it, Boris Johnson's dwindling authority is becoming a public health issue. Likewise, Donald Trump was labeled a public health threat by his opponents while in office. Public health has become a principal means to attack a political opponent or a set of political ideas. In 2019, a group of medics even wrote a letter to The Guardian calling a no-deal Brexit a threat to public health. Other critics of Brexit called it a confused concept that threatens public health. As public health has become politicized, politics have become medicalized. The pandemic has intensified this medicalization of politics. There is now virtually nothing that cannot be conceived of as a public health issue. Take racism. Writing in The Lancet earlier this year, identitarian academic Kehendi Andrews insisted that racism is a public health crisis. In the US, the director of the Centers for Disease Control, Rochelle Walensky, made a similar claim earlier this year. Racism is a serious public health threat that directly affects the well-being of millions of Americans, she said. The CDC has since launched a new racism and health web portal. Directly affects the well-being of millions of Americans. That is quite an extraordinary claim for a public health official to make. Faridi continues, all this changes the very meaning of racism. Racial oppression used to be understood in terms of political, social, and economic domination. Now it is understood in terms of ill health. The racially oppressed are now as likely to be seen as patients in need of medical intervention as they are victims of political injustice. Racism isn't just unfair, it's making us ill, complains a Guardian contributor. Likewise, anti-racist campaigners portray racism as a mental health problem. Student supporters of the Rhodes Must Fall movement at Oxford have claimed that they feel traumatized by the presence of the Cecil Rhodes statue. Virtually every dimension of life has been reframed as a matter of public health. Homophobia is a health issue, argues one academic. Gambling is too. So are climate change and war. Even boredom has been categorized as a threat to public health. Yes, these people need to be taken down. not one peg, but a whole bunch of pegs. They're drunk on their own self-importance. Oh, let's take a look at the numbers from Ontario. And again, these are the kind of data that you would think would lead the news reports. No. This is from Caressa Wilson at CP24. Ontario provincial health officials logged 3,453 new infections today, down from 3,784 a day ago, but up from 1,429 a week ago. Over the past few weeks, cases have been rising steadily across Ontario as the Omicron variant now accounts for 91% of coronaviruses in the province, according to Ontario's COVID-19 Science Advisory Table. And again, that is a good thing, right? Okay. Among the latest cases, 148 have an unknown vaccination status. 132 are partially vaccinated. 673 are unvaccinated. 2,500 are fully vaccinated. This is a pandemic of the vaccinated. But for some reason, we're not talking about that. Yeah, get the booster. Where's the evidence that the booster is going to work? Where's the evidence? It doesn't matter. And wear masks. You know, a good one. N95. Maybe more than one. According to CP24, the Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford, is homeless. Or something like that. He cannot get into his residence because of all of the protesters outside. How about that? And Ford's daughter is in the news. She has been known to say some spicy things about COVID-19. This is from blogto.com. Ontario Premier Doug Ford's eldest daughter is once again ruffling feathers with a message posted to Instagram that seems to mock and flout the gathering limits announced by her own dad Friday. Krista Ford Haynes, 30, posted a screenshot to IG Stories on Sunday with the following text blurb. This Christmas, if you see 20 cars at your neighbor's house and you're thinking about reporting them, go to the fridge and drink a big glass of milk. Why? Milk is good for your teeth. You know what else is good for your teeth? Mind your own effing business. Oh, and the usual suspects. Oh, will the Ford family be observing public health protocols? Casually alluding to assault from the daughter of the Premier and spouse of a soon-to-be former law enforcement officer. He's soon to be a former law enforcement officer. He's getting fired because of his position on mandatory vaccination. And apparently the NHL shuts down Wednesday through Saturday. Now we know it's serious. Have you noticed this? The people who are most hysterical, most in favor of the COVID-19 sanitary dictatorship, if you go to their Twitter feeds and look at the background pic and their avatars or what they say in the text, they are not always, but so very frequently, they define themselves by their allegiances to various sports ball teams. I suppose this could be a boomer thing. And the NFL will postpone some games over COVID surge. Yep, more than 100 NFL players reportedly have tested positive for the coronavirus in the past week. Oh, and let's look at the statistics from Alberta, where apparently Jason Kenney is the worst man in the world and personally responsible, for mass murder. That's what opponents are saying. I don't know, what difference anyone else being in charge. Let's look at the official statistics up to December the 20th, yesterday. New cases, vaccine status. Fully vaccinated, 74.5%. Unvaccinated, 24.7%. Active cases, fully vaccinated, 64.2%. Unvaccinated, 34.18%. How about that, huh? How about that? So what's happening in my own province of British Columbia? Guess what? Is it time to panic? Yes, it is. Let's start closing things. I mean, they did it in Quebec. Oh, and Dr. Bonnie Henry, who is being assailed on both sides. Apparently, she has not shut down all human activity in British Columbia. So she has not gone far enough and doesn't care about human life. More restrictions are coming into effect in BC, shutting bars and banning gatherings like weddings. The province is expanding its rapid testing program, though the changes will take at least 2 weeks. Officials are opening more vaccination centers, including reopening the Vancouver Convention Centre to speed up booster shots. BC will be canceling scheduled surgeries as of January the 4th. Officials have announced more public health restrictions in BC, including a shutdown of bars and nightclubs, as well as plans to cancel scheduled surgeries as the Omicron variant spreads across the province. Provincial Health Officer Dr. Henry revealed the latest round of public health orders Tuesday. They take effect tomorrow and include no indoor organized gatherings of any size, including weddings, receptions, and parties. So that Christmas get-together, I guess you can just forget about that. Bars and nightclubs closed, maximum of 6 people per table at a restaurant, pub, or cafe. Who added this? It says bars closed. Well, a pub is a bar. Gyms, fitness centers, and dance studios must be shut down because we don't want people getting exercise. Seated events like concerts, sports games, movie theaters are down to 50% capacity. These new restrictions are in addition to the existing orders which came into effect Monday. Personal gatherings are still limited to your household, plus 10 guests or one additional household if it's larger than 10 guests. Everyone in the house must be vaccinated. Yes, and Bonnie Henry admits that, oh yeah, we looked at Quebec and they're shutting everything down, so I guess we had to do it too. How many? They're just going to keep doing the same things. Just going to keep doing the same things over and over and over again, because that's, what Briggs calls the expertocracy. What do they know how to do? They know, they're like the hedgehog versus the fox. They know one thing, and that's how to dig a hole and then dig it deeper and deeper and deeper. Because, they must do something. Alex Berenson writes, the simplest way to understand the insanity of boosting from Omicron. If the first generation monoclonal antibodies are now so useless that they're being retired, why would the first generation vaccines be any better? We call them vaccines, but it is clear after a year of use that the mRNA shots do not produce a robust long-term B or T cell immune response. What they do is drive up antibodies to the spike protein to unnaturally high levels, but put that aside. And those antibodies are extremely narrowly focused, not just on the spike protein, but on a particular part of it. In other words, they basically turn your body into a factory for generating monoclonal antibodies for the original wild-type virus. But those antibodies don't work anymore against Omicron. Its shape is too different. They can't attach properly, which is why the Lilly and Regeneron antibodies are being phased out. Yet the same logic that has led to the realization that the MAB cocktails won't work is being ignored for the vaccines. Why? I don't know. But the answer definitely is not a pathetic unwillingness to admit vaccine failure at all costs. After all, we've learned over the last 2 years that pride and vanity never drive the decisions of our public health authorities. No, indeed. Our public health authorities are beyond suspicion. Alex Berenson is suing Twitter, which the Daily Mail covered, which the American media is just ignoring, because that couldn't possibly be considered an important news case, medical case, First Amendment case. So, over on Twitter, one of America's finest legal scholars is taking time out from his busy practice to rebut the complaint pro Mallow. He must have a lot to do because he spent most of the day on this. I wonder which client he's billing or if he's between clients at the moment. Anyway, you can tell he's a serious guy because he throws up memes with every tweet, just like Judge Brandeis. What's fascinating is that despite his endless tweets, he has somehow not managed to grasp one of the core arguments, simple in theory, though complex in its details, that the complaint raises. For those of you who have neither the time nor the inclination to wade through the argument, it goes like this. 1. Twitter is indisputably a messenger service. A long-standing California law regulates messenger services as common carriers. This means that they must accept all messages they receive. Twitter must thus accept all the tweets it receives. It has no First Amendment right to refuse them on the basis that it does not agree with them. 2. A federal law, commonly called Section 230, preempts the California law, giving Twitter the right to reject or ban users. Whether that right is universal or whether Twitter must act in good faith in restricting service is a separate question. Whether Twitter acted in good faith in this case is still another question. But put those issues aside for the moment. 3. Section 230 is what enables Twitter to claim a First Amendment privilege that supersedes the California law and restrict my own First Amendment right to speak. Thus, the federal courts have the right to review 230 on First Amendment grounds. Eugene Volokh, who is a top constitutional scholar, was among the first people to raise this possibility. 4. Defenders of Twitter and other social media behemoths have successfully confused courts and lawmakers about the distinction between Twitter the company and Twitter the platform. Under the First Amendment, Twitter the company is, of course, free to say whatever it likes on its platform in ads, through lobbyists, or anywhere else. 5. But Twitter, the platform, should be open to all under California law, and even if the courts find that Section 230's preemption of California law is inconsistent with the First Amendment and allows Twitter, the company, to set rules on who can use the platform, those rules cannot be completely arbitrary or discriminatory. 6. Twitter itself acknowledges this fact in explaining its rules and acknowledged it further in creating its 5-strike policy around so-called COVID-19 misinformation. Twitter is legally liable for failing to follow its own rules and contractual obligations, in my case. 7. The complaint has many other factual and legal arguments. I'm not going to go into them here. I'm also not going to pull back even further and walk through exactly why the Section 230, as it has been interpreted, is so dangerous. That's a broader argument that belongs in an op-ed for a major newspaper in the unlikely event they'll have me. But I hope this helps everyone understand the complaint a little better. Brendan O'Neill at Spiked has a piece called The Erasure of Liberty. Leo Varadkar has said the quiet part out loud. The Deputy Prime Minister of Ireland has made it clear they were now in a forever war with COVID and that one of the chief casualties will be freedom. On Friday, as Ireland introduced a raft of new measures to limit the impact of Omicron, Varadkar said that the COVID crisis could last for several years. It's a long war, he said. Then came the killer line, words that should chill not only the inhabitants of Ireland, but people across Western Europe. Looking forward to the bleak, illiberal future COVID will allegedly force us to live under, Varadkar said that, quote, perhaps in advance of those winters and those variants, we should try to have periods of freedom and give people a bit of a break, unquote. Periods of freedom. Those 3 words should worry everyone. They capture possibly better than any other utterance from a member of the political class over the past 21 months, just what a historic reorganization of society we are currently living through. Varadkar's dispiriting dream is one of permanent restrictions and lockdowns, though they'll occasionally be punctured by periods of freedom, by brief respites from government control, by intervals of a few months or perhaps just a few weeks in which your gracious leaders will allow you to do what you want, until winter starts to loom again, that is, with its promise of respiratory disease, and then your period of freedom will be over. Varadkar's unguarded statement confirms that in the era of COVID, the relationship between the state and the individual is being radically rearranged to the benefit of the former and the degradation of the latter. Brendan O'Neill does not make this point, but I will. I have noticed, and doubtless you have as well, that so many of the people calling the shots in politics, in among the latrine wallas, at universities, etc., these people are not Westerners. As far as I can tell, Westerners are the only people who care about liberty and freedom in the world. The rest of the world cares only about power. And right now, they are wielding it. Oh, and let's have a little roundup from the world. From Summit News, this is from Steve Watson. Michael O'Leary, the CEO of Ryanair, has declared that anyone who remains unvaccinated should be completely cut off from society. Quote, if you're not vaccinated, you shouldn't be allowed in the hospital, you shouldn't be allowed to fly, you shouldn't be allowed on the London Underground, and you shouldn't be allowed in the local supermarket of your pharmacy either, he told The Telegraph. You can sit at home and, get your deliveries of medicine and food, but you should not, go to work or go on public transport unless you have a vaccine certificate. He admitted that making vaccines compulsory is an infringement of your civil liberties, but added that the way around it is you simply make life so difficult, or make it that there are lots of things you can't do unless you get vaccinated. Well, I'm still a pureblood, and I've been banned from restaurants and cinemas and such like for months now. But the funny thing is these people who are double or triple vaccinated, according to Bonnie Henry, starting tomorrow, they're not going to be able to go either. So it really hasn't done them much good, has it? Again, Summit News, Paul Joseph Watson, the French Minister of Health, has admitted that vaccine passports are a disguised form of mandatory vaccines, despite President Macron claiming vaccine mandates will not be compulsory. Olivier Véran revealed that the primary purpose of the country's COVID pass scheme was to force the vaccinated to cave in. And in other world news, the Germans are leading the way. German Health Minister Karl Lauterbach has called for making COVID vaccination mandatory immediately for the entire German population. This is from Steve Watson at Summit News. As reported by Der Spiegel, Federal Health Minister Karl Lauterbach of the Social Democratic Party fears that the number of infections will rise sharply due to the new Omicron variant. I assume a massive fifth wave, said Lauterbach when visiting a vaccination center in Hanover. We have to assume that the wave of Omicrons that we are facing, which in my opinion we cannot prevent, will be a massive challenge for our hospitals, for our intensive care units, but also for society as a whole. The health minister further claimed that Omicron cannot be got under control with a double vaccination alone. We mustn't be bullied into a false sense of security, he said, urging that a massive booster campaign is needed, boosting several million people a week. He added that he intends to try by all means to make the vaccines compulsory. And Japan is going about this a little differently. This is Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. Despite numerous major countries making COVID-19 vaccines mandatory, the Japanese government has told its citizens, quote, do not discriminate against those who have not been vaccinated, unquote. No vaccination will be given without consent. Please do not force anyone in your workplace or those who are around you to be vaccinated. Do not discriminate against those who have not been vaccinated. This comes from the Ministry of Health, Labor, and Welfare. The Prime Minister's website also contains a similar statement. Vaccines will never be administered without the recipient's consent. We urge the public never to coerce vaccines at the workplace or upon others around them, and never to treat those who have not received the vaccine in a discriminatory manner. Meanwhile, in Austria, the government is literally hiring people to hunt down those who refused to take the jab. Apparently, they can, even before overtime, they can earn almost 39,000 euros a year doing this. These are great time for snitches. Great. The very attractive Kat Rosenfield has a piece at Unheard called "The Left Would Sacrifice the Unvaccinated." An under-discussed element of the COVID pandemic is the cost of the virus, not in American lives, but in American dollars. In the United States, a COVID hospitalization costs $29,000 on average. If you're sick enough to require an ICU stay and a ventilator, That average soars to 156,000. And in a country without universal health care, with a piecemeal system of private insurance that ties insurance coverage to employment, and amid a pandemic that has left many unemployed, an enormous number of Americans stand to find themselves underwater. There's a looming crisis of COVID medical debt. Already their stories are legion. There's the flight attendant who spent a week in the hospital with COVID, then spent 6 months fighting with the insurance company over the $25,000 bill. There's the Phoenix family who are hit with $1 million claim summary and a bill for $700,000 while still grieving their father's death. 10 years ago, stories like this would have been held up by our country's left wing as proof of the continued desperate need for healthcare reform. The stratospheric cost of healthcare, the idea that a citizen of the world's wealthiest nations could go bankrupt just by falling ill, the prospect of a suffering person foregoing treatment because they couldn't afford it, these were stains upon our country, the hallmarks of a broken system. The notion of healthcare as a human right was fundamental to the 2009 debates over Obama's Affordable Care Act. Indeed, the idea that the left would ever limit someone's access to healthcare on moral or ideological grounds was considered laughable. A bogeyman invented by the right in the form of memorably hysterical panic about death panels. When Sarah Palin claimed that Obama's healthcare bill would ration care only to those deemed worthy by government bureaucrats, the fact-checking site PolitiFact declared it the lie of the year, writing, Palin's statement sounds more like a science fiction movie, Soylent Green, anyone than part of an actual bill before Congress. Suffice to say, things have changed. First, that actual bill is an actual thing, albeit a state rather than a federal prospect. On December 6th, Illinois State Representative Jonathan Carroll advanced legislation to make unvaccinated COVID patients pay out of pocket for the cost of their medical treatment, whether or not they were insured, no matter how astronomical those costs might be. Carroll rescinded the bill a few days later, citing a backlash that included death threats, but not before it found support in some remarkable places, including the Twitter account of the progressive organization Occupy Democrats, which posted an all-caps clarion call. Just a few days later, Atlantic editor David Frum suggested that it was time for the country to return to normal, but while encouraging hospitals to quietly triage emergency care to serve the unvaccinated last. Quite the humanitarian, that David Frum. And there's a long piece at Unheard, which I'll just mention. You can look it up, obviously. It's by Matthew Crawford, and it's called How Science Has Been Corrupted. Matthew Crawford's father was a scientist, a leading American scientist. My father became famous for his kitchen physics experiments after he included assignments based on them in a textbook he wrote, published in 1968, and beloved by generations of physics students, Waves, Volume 3 of the Berkeley Physics course. Long story made short, science is no longer the province of disinterested amateurs. They are professionals now, and who are they paid for? Who pays for them? Government and big business. And as you know, he who pays the piper calls the tune. Let's check in and see how high the hysteria meter at Bruce Arthur's Twitter feed is. He's a COVID reporter for the Toronto Star. The contact tracing system is buckling under Omicron, so you shouldn't wait for a call from public health. You test positive, call everyone. This is from May Warren at the Star. South Africa has announced they're not doing that anymore because it makes no sense as far as they see it, because people just aren't getting sick enough from Omicron. Let's see. Ezra Levant had tweeted a $5,000 bounty to anyone who sends video of this fear-mongering TV doctor breaking COVID rules. This was Nahid Tassani. Retweet this if you canceled your holiday get-together plans and know you are doing the right thing. Michael Warner had responded, this is despicable, targeted, and violent. Is it now? I hope that my fellow physicians of all stripes, and anyone who cares about goodness and human decency condemns this in the strongest possible way. Bruce Arthur comments, Ezra is scum, but also pay attention. It's just a logical progression for how conservatives have been smearing and targeting doctors all pandemic long. They're saints. They're just saints. This is from Bruce Arthur yesterday. Rapid test chaos, booster scramble, Pfizer shortages, contact tracing failing, testing squeezed. Ontario's defenses against Omicron are already crumbling, and if it feels like every person for themselves, it probably is. And very interesting hypothesis from Eugippius at Substack. Omicron is not normal. No immediate progenitors are known as close relatives or viruses last seen in early to mid-2020. The orthodox explanation for this awkward fact is that it has spent the last 18 months lurking in a geography with poor genomic surveillance or in a chronically infected individual. The simpler explanation is that it leaked from a laboratory. As El Gato Malo and others have indicated, evidence is strong that Omicron circulates preferentially in the vaccinated. In all likelihood, it is the result of gain-of-function research in which SARS-2 is passaged repeatedly through convalescent or vaccinated plasma in the hopes of helping the virus evade acquired immunity. The purpose of this research would be to anticipate future immune escape variants that vaccines might target. Omicron carries a series of highly unlikely and suspicious mutations in its spike protein. It is hard to imagine that these mutations can have arisen via natural processes because all but one of them are non-synonymous. That is, they code for different amino acid sequences. Starkly mutated variants favored by natural selection should have a great many meaningless synonymous mutations as well. And William Bricks responded to this that something has to be done about gain-of-function research. If the scientists won't stop it, and they won't, they have to be stopped. Oh, yeah, sorry, we came up with a disease which is going to kill half the world, but our intentions were good. How they can get away with this is, I don't know, it is beyond me. Well, I kind of know how, because they're experts. Experts are always right. Let's go to dailyskeptic.org, formerly Locked On Skeptics. No new restrictions in England before Christmas, but Boris Johnson says we can't rule out any further measures after Christmas as Omicron spreads fast. Yeah, that thing which is necessary for us to do in order to protect people's health, we're going to wait because it would be unpopular to do it now. Does that logic make any sense to anyone? And Rishi Sunak offers $1 billion rescue package to hospitality sector. How about stop closing businesses? And then you wouldn't have to hand, a billion here, a billion there. Pretty soon you're talking real money. And this would be Toby Young. Yes, Toby Young writes, has Boris finally placed his trust in the common sense of the British people rather than the Cassandras in lab coats? I've written a piece for the Mail praising Boris for deciding not to impose further restrictions at yesterday's cabinet meeting. This could be a turning point, I argue. Of course, Britain has been reduced, or England, I should say, has been reduced to a place where everyone is tearing their hair out because apparently government officials, politicians, were working outside on a terrace, eating cheese and drinking wine. Yes, I know. Shocking. Right? Stop press. Boris has confirmed that no new COVID restrictions will be brought in before Christmas. South Africa's SAGE tells governments end contact tracing and self-isolation for COVID because it's not worth it. I don't know. Wouldn't it be fun to make the argument, why aren't we listening to the science, the South African science? Is it because they're black? U.S. journalist files lawsuit to fight back against Twitter's censorship. We know that already. Do not discriminate, say the Japanese. We know that. The World Health Organization tells public to cancel Christmas holiday plans. Ofcom complained about collaboration between Sky News and government-owned company to promote net zero. Omicron is not surging, Boris. There's a ton more testing and infections are already peaking. Again, good news, right? Let's go to the chat. Hello to Don Willis. Thank you for your kind words. Everett Dirksen said that. Emmett Kelly said, yeah, I believe he said millions, but that was like 1967 or something like that. Thank you for your kind words, Joaquin 666. It's a KMG miracle. After gaming is out for Perfect Victory for over 30 years, Klaus Schwab didn't foresee Manchin in his simulation, just completely forgot about him, says Oscar Toe. Well, thank you for your kind words, Don from Beyond. Why panic later when you can panic now, says Chogokin 666. Yes, indeed. The ACA got rid of coverage limits, no pre-existing conditions, etc. Greatest thing ever, says William Hicks. I don't know anyone interested in getting booster shots, says Texas Feral Hog. In Canada, they've been lining the streets, literally, from 6 o'clock in the morning in places like Ontario, where it is quite cold and the ground is covered with snow. Sarah Palin warned us, got to hand it to her on that, says Gamiston. Who else do we have here? Manchin is like the kryptonite to the oligarch. This is one guy, a senator from West Virginia. They can't sweet talk this guy. Can't they just offer him, like $10 zillion for his state so he could, be senator or governor forever? Chogokin 666 says, read the article listed on the American Sun Winners Losers post. I do every Friday. What the oligarchs are planning. Looking at Sticks and Hammer 666 BMI, I can confirm he is not a Fed, says Oscar Toe. Germans are natural authoritarians but haven't gotten it right since 1918, says Yo Mama. Okay, so I have to be careful here. LifeSite News is always good. LifeSiteNews.com. There's a piece by Dr. Peter McCullough, which I'd recommend that people read. I'm not going to read from it, okay? But it has to do with VAERS, the U.S. Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, and how it perennially underreports. And there is a similar piece on Steve Kirsch's Substack. And Kirsch is spelled Kirsch, and he makes a very cogent argument about the real costs based on what we know about the VAERS system. Yes, disinformation. Don't you just hate it? There seems to be a cottage industry. I don't even know whether you could call it a cottage industry in Canada now, of people who are paid to tell us that no, we only have we got to listen to them. We can't listen to anyone else that's not legit. Like what's this woman's name? Hang on, something happened to the story there. It's from Global News, and it is from a woman called Ashley Stewart, and it is called "The Great COVID-19 Infodemic: How Disinformation Networks Are Radicalizing Canadians." But are they also racializing them? I think that needs to be investigated as well. A common refrain of those opposed to vaccines is that immunizations are harmful to people's health and an infringement on human rights. Any kind of science proving the efficacy of any vaccine is often denied. Hey, why don't you look at that science from the province of Ontario? Huh? What was it, 670 versus 2,500 fully vaccinated? Let's talk about that. In 2021, those health concerns have mutated into a widespread belief among the most staunchly anti-vaccine that if you receive a COVID-19 vaccine dose, you will almost certainly die. This is a logical fallacy here. I don't know whether the author knows it, Oh, yes, the most radical adherents of a believe this. Okay. What about just the average, adherent? There's obviously everyone dies. So everyone who receives a COVID-19 vaccine dose will eventually die. But I don't know very many people who believe that everyone who gets a COVID-19 vaccine dose will almost certainly die. Well, in the near term, say. And I read a lot of stuff. The latter is a baseless conspiracy theory, but tens of thousands believe it's true and have created social media channels to promote it. In an attempt to find the nucleus of the Canadian misinformation campaign, I spent a month immersed in the online world of anti-vaccine communities across the country. Ooh, sounds exciting. I joined anti-vaccine and anti-mandate groups on Telegram and Facebook, witnessing them transform from meeting places for the unvaccinated to a virtual confluence of hatred and disinformation, where I observed, for instance, calls for medical experts to be hanged and people comparing mass vaccination to a genocide. Alongside organizing countrywide anti-vaccine rallies, tens of thousands of Canadians are sharing fake news stories about rising stillbirth numbers, deaths caused by the COVID-19 vaccine, and baseless theories of an impending social credit system that begins with QR codes. Oh, baseless. Yeah, I just wanted to grab a bite to eat. Can we see your smartphone? For what? For your QR code? Oh, I don't have it. Well, I'm sorry, we can't let you in. Baseless. Huh? Baseless. I can't get on a airplane. I can't get on a ferry. I can't get to a cinema. Can't go to restaurants. But it is baseless. What the British government, the Australian government is sending smartphone messages to people? Where are you right now? Prove that you are not somewhere illegal. Do they keep up with this? It was noted some months ago that the supposed conspiracy theorists, tend to have a much greater understanding of what is actually going on than those that support the expert point of view. The COVID-19 infodemic, the spread of misinformation alongside the spread of the virus, has been described as one of the greatest threats to overcoming the pandemic. But it's also something new. False narratives swirled around the polio vaccine in the 1950s. Oh, that there were bad batches out there that killed hundreds of people. That actually happened. The major difference in 2021 is that we have social media. While social media giants such as Facebook and Twitter say they are doing their best to stamp out COVID-19 misinformation, such groups continue to hide in plain sight. All they've done is gotten more creative with their names. Searches for anti-vaccine Canada won't turn up any results, but plug in synonyms for freedom or unity in Canada and you'll find plenty. Others have migrated to alternative messaging sites such as Telegram. This is where you'll find Unvaxxed Canada, Vaccine Choice Canada, and BC Interior Freedom Fighters, and various region-specific and career-specific groups they have spawned, which includes hundreds of members regularly espousing anti-vaccine statements. There are now groups for unvaccinated healthcare workers, teachers, police officers, and federal employees. Oh my God, it's almost as these people are involved in a political organization, and only the left's allowed to do that. Okay, yeah, just exaggerated. Okay. It's impossible to tell how many channels there are as new ones pop up every few days. Don't you mean every few minutes? It follows a rule that emerges very quickly after you join, that most narratives fly in the face of real, verified medical information. Oh, you mean the vaccine is 95% efficacious? That verifiable? Huh? Here's that figure: Moderna 94.1% and AstraZeneca 62%. That, however, changed recently in the face of the Omicron variant. It was also happening under Delta. It was. Okay, and this goes on forever. Who paid for this, I wonder? Huh? Who paid for this? Do we have any explanation at the bottom of the story? Given that the vaccines are a year old, we don't really have all that much data. Pfizer has said that it is not going to release its final report on its vaccine until, 2025? As Berenson joked, so soon? Okay. Yeah, as I say, I would like to I'd like to know who paid for this. Oh yeah, people put yeah, okay. People in the comments section. A lot of publications got rid of their comment section because they don't like being talked back to. And oh, I wanted to talk briefly about David A. French, the great American Christian and right-wing intellectual. He's a child. Okay, so he tweeted a day ago. There's a GIF of Chris Farley, in that motivational speaker character, doing a dance. It's go time. And French tweeted Spider-Man IMAX. And he later followed up with short review, outstanding, absolute top tier Marvel. But of course, and someone responded to me that the fact that David French, who is 52 years old, just goes nuts over these Marvel movies and defends them at every. Yes, I'll read it. The tweet in its entirety from Tiger Tiger Burning Bright, or Tiger of Wrath. The fact that French, a 52-year-old man, has boundless enthusiasm for comic book movies and passionately defends them at every turn is probably the most offensive thing about him, obviously. I mean, it would be one thing. He actually said that superhero movies were one of the greatest things about America. That's what he said. He doesn't seem to consume anything else. And I use the word consume advisedly. Let's talk about the Pope. Is the Pope Catholic? I don't think so. I think he's a vicious old man who hates the church and is hell-bent on destroying it. This is from LifeSite News. Michael Haynes. The Vatican launched a new attack on the traditional Latin Mass today when the Congregation for Divine Worship and the Discipline of the Sacraments released a responsa to 11 questions on the Latin Mass. The responsa implements severe restrictions on celebrating the sacraments in the traditional manner, as well as on priests who refuse to con-celebrate. The document was signed by the staunchly anti-traditionalist head of the CDW, an Englishman, Archbishop Arthur Roche. It is dated December 4th, but was published December 18th. It was approved by Pope Francis in November. The document was uncompromising in its attitudes towards the traditional ceremonies accompanying the 7 sacraments. Is it possible, according to the provisions of the motu proprio, to celebrate the sacraments with the Rituale Romanum and the Pontificale Romanum, which predate the liturgical reform of the Second Vatican Council? Negative was the congregation's response. It stipulated that diocesan bishops can only grant permission to use the Rituale Romanum, and this permission is only to be granted in canonically erected personal parishes, such as those of the Institute of Christ the King, the Fraternity of St. Peter, or the Institute of the Good Shepherd. 5 of the 7 sacraments are contained in the Rituale Romanum: baptism, penance, Holy Communion, matrimony, and extreme unction. This episcopal permission to use the Rituale should be granted by the diocesan bishop only after discernment. The responsa specifically ruled out bishops granting permission for the use of the Pontificale Romanum, which contains the sacraments of confirmation and holy orders. The aim to suppress the traditional Latin Mass is clear. The congregation reminded bishops that Traditionis Custodes intends to reestablish in the whole Church of the Roman Rite a single and identical prayer expressing this unity, apparently in line with Vatican II and the tradition of the Church. Concelebration is widespread in the Novus Ordo, or New Order, which came out in 1970. And the congregation have moved to promote this liturgical practice by placing severe restrictions on priests who do not do it. Hence, if a priest currently allowed to say the Latin Mass, whether he be diocesan or part of a traditional order, since the responsive does not differentiate and does not recognize the validity and legitimacy of concelebration, refusing to concelebrate, in particular at the Chrism Mass, he is to be banned from saying the traditional Mass. Yes, the traditional Mass, or the Mass of Pope St. Pius V, as it is called, has proved to be rather popular in recent years, despite bishops simply disregarding what Ratzinger, later Benedict VI, what he ordered. Michael Brendan Doherty, my old friend, there's a piece in National Review. 13 and a half years ago, Pope Benedict XVI boldly granted permission to priests and groups of Catholics to have their patrimony back, what is commonly called the traditional Latin Mass, and not just the Mass, but the ancient prayers and liturgies for baptisms, confirmations, and ordinations. The result of this permission was a massive growth of interest in the traditional rites and prayers of Catholicism, the growth of liturgical arts, the formation of choirs and scholas, equipping themselves to sing the Gregorian chant or the great polyphonic compositions of Monteverdi, Mozart, Tallis, Morales, and so many others. Pope Francis has always treated this enthusiasm as if it were toxic sludge, making fun of the so-called rigid young priests who want to celebrate this Mass. Francis was formed by the revolutionary spirit of the Second Vatican Council that went deep into his Jesuit formation. This revolution held as a dogma that the traditional Mass of the Church was a dead end, a moribund rite that would repel the young. Only the new Reformed rites after the Council would have the vital spirit that the Church needed. He has given homily after homily and sermon after sermon, denouncing the spirit of rigidity that, as he sees it, obsessed with upholding tradition, the spirit that says, in Pope Francis's words, it's this or nothing. Unsurprisingly, Pope Francis is telling traditionalists attached to the traditional prayers of the Church, it's this or nothing. Over the summer, he issued a document dramatically reversing Benedict's generosity with tradition. Francis instead held that the old rites were a source of division that had to be actively managed and brought to heel. The bishops performing same-sex blessings in Germany, he seems not to be as worried about them. I could also mention the priests concelebrating Mass with Lutherans. The Pope doesn't seem to care about that much either. Many bishops, particularly in America, simply announced that there was no division emanating from these communities and let them go on as they were. For Christmas, the Vatican decided to clarify what it meant. And what it meant was to install a campaign of vindictive micromanagement that would make a commissar blush. First, there was the Orwellian touch, explaining that Big Brother's administration was for their own good. There is no intention in these provisions to marginalize the faithful who were rooted in the previous form of celebration, the Vatican announced, before going on to make everything about the traditional Mass seem onerous and taboo. And this Pope, anti-Pope Francis, came to power because of politicking, which is forbidden, by the way, at papal conclaves, by a group called the St. Gallen or St. Gallen Mafia. One of Francis's more ridiculous hagiographers, the day after these instructions were issued, tattled about churches in the United Kingdom that still listed the times of their Latin Masses for Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. Progressive Catholics spent the better part of 3 decades complaining that the papacy had become too authoritarian, had usurped too many functions that belonged properly to local bishops, and was too paranoid about heresy. Why? Because John Paul II and Benedict occasionally intervened to publicly correct well-published theologians. One wit on Twitter summed up the situation thusly: there'd be Catherine constantly. A, Vatican II is not a rupture in the Church and the faith remains unchanged. B, the post-Vatican II Mass is an expression of that faith. C, the pre-Vatican II Mass is not an expression of that faith. You can't expect people to be convinced of A and B when you're also telling them C. I came across a piece on this question of a rupture. It's quite well done. It's from a site called padreperegrino.org. Hermeneutic of continuity or hermeneutic of rupture. As a middle-of-the-road conservative in seminary, I would frequently say things like Vatican II did not change Catholic doctrine, but it did change how we package it for the postmodern mind. Or perhaps I would say dogma can't change, but we can explain it can change. Phrases like this demonstrate the hermeneutic of continuity we cling to. We believe the Catholic Church before 1963 was the same as the Church after 1963. We just had to return to the early Church in order to get back to the sources if we wanted to square the circle. If we just lined up the stars correctly between the teachings of Pope St. Pius X and Pope Paul VI. But the more I read the Church Fathers, the more I saw nothing of modernist ideas like religious indifferentism, sometimes called ecumenism, and other heresies. The left now agrees with the right that a new religion began in the 1960s. This is called the hermeneutic of rupture. Recently, the left now admits not only a hermeneutic of rupture between the old and the new, but that the old must be destroyed. It is time to return to bishops the authority over the Tridentine liturgy in their diocese. The Church needs to be clear that it wants the unreformed liturgy to disappear and will only allow it out of pastoral kindness to older people who do not understand the need for change. Children and young people should not be allowed to attend such masses. This is from Father Thomas Rees, S.J., who works at Religion News Service and used to work at the National Catholic Reporter and America Magazine. You can have that Latin Mass, okay? You cannot have the theology of the 16th century that was at the basis of the Latin Mass, says Massimo Fagioli in an American Magazine interview. From the names of the two books written by Massimo Fagioli, you can see that the goal of destroying the ancient Catholic faith and destroying the ancient Catholic liturgy is not an offensive idea to those with power, even if gained in an illegal election process. In other words, these are not fringe ideas, or if they are fringe authors, they are speaking what many in the middle of the theological road but believe, but are probably afraid to say, namely things that children and young people should not be allowed to attend such masses. Cardinal Ratzinger, Benedict XVI, believed fervently in the hermeneutic of continuity, but it was always going to be a bust. It's rather like those Anglicans, after the Oxford movement in the 1840s. They said there was no great rupture under Henry VIII. Come off it. You can't seriously believe that. And in fact, most of the leading members of the Oxford movement left the Anglican Church and became Catholic. But no, the past is to be destroyed, and everything that was once clear is to be made obscure. I don't know that Catholic schools even teach Catholic theology anymore. But apparently that's a good thing, because one doesn't want to be rigid. And as Anti-Pope Francis has said, you don't want Catholics breeding like rabbits. He's an extraordinarily nasty man and has always been a nasty man. Shortly after he became Pope, he was told that, I don't know, a bunch of women, probably old women, were saying novenas for him, and he mocked them. He mocked women praying for him. When he was attending some sort of event and he saw a bunch of altar boys making, the praying hands gestures, he went like this. He was so irritated. Stop doing that. Basta, Just a creep. An absolute creep. And, okay, let's go to the chat. I remember watching a doc about him made by, admittedly, his enemies on the Protestant Baptist side of things, says David the Gnome. For me, hermeneutics, says Quachulango. Okay. Spelled, what? Was he the founder? Ignatius Loyola. Yes. I've seen this charge that he was a converso. I don't care if it's true. I don't think that his loyalty to the faith could be in doubt. David says, Jesuits seem to be left-wing weirdos almost to a man. This is true. That was not once the way of the Jesuits, in fact. Why does Pope Francis hate the Tridentine Mass so much? Well, a famous American bishop, Fulton Sheen, said that it was the most beautiful thing this side of heaven. That's why he hates it. Teleologic Jones says undermining the tradition of the church undermines the tradition of the authority in the church. These Gnostic Marxists have only power, not legitimate authority. Kevin, you might enjoy the young Pope for the vestments, if nothing else, as Jokin 666. I've never understood why people who don't speak Latin would want Mass to be in Latin. Well, I want it to be in Latin because it's the same everywhere in the world. There are no regional variations. And that means a Catholic can go anywhere and have the glorious Mass. You know, since North America has become so ethnic now that it's not even, oh, okay, so I'll go to an English Mass. There's lots of parishes where you'd be lucky to find English Masses. Remember the Zoloft depression egg? Really had pathos, in my opinion, says Jokin 666. I'd love to see someone draw a picture of all the Marvel superheroes weeping over an image of the spiked ball Omicron virus, says Oscar Toe. Did you see the giant snake dome at the Vatican, says Metal Mike? Yes, I did. I also saw the Pope was given a communist crucifix by the president of Bolivia. Yeah, hammer and sickle. He was delighted by it. Metal Mike says this is the last pope as was prophesied. I don't go into that sort of thing. I will tell you this. I wrote years ago about the third secret of Fatima and why the Vatican kept it secret for decades after promising to release it, and why Archbishop Ratzinger delivered a denouement that was so lame. This is what they kept secret for all those years? No. I talked to various people who claim to have seen the third secret, and it seems fairly obvious to me that the third secret is that the Vatican itself would be overrun by heretics. Okay, let's talk about journalism, and it's crazy. Well, before we get to that, let's talk about the Lutheran Church in the United States. This is from Calvin Freiberger. Maybe you've seen this story. LifeSite News. Left-wing Lutheran Church holds drag sermon for children to reflect on joy. So what are they, grooming children now? Openly? The event took place at St. Luke's Lutheran Church of Logan Square in Chicago, which advertises a heavy social justice bent. Why don't they just call it something else? Do they have any idea what, if Martin Luther, if you could summon Martin Luther, what he would do to these people? In a December 11th Facebook post, St. Luke's Lutheran Church of Logan Square pastor Aaron Musser explained that for his then upcoming sermon, preaching in drag would be a theological reflection on joy, which overflows so abundantly it can't help but make itself known. It's been a difficult and trying couple of years, and I decided instead of telling you this is how I want you to be joyful, as we prepare for this dress rehearsal, I figured I would instead put on a dress, as so many who have inspired me have done. Musser preached on December 12th, clad in a blonde wig and a full-length white dress emblazoned with a cross, to a group of children in COVID-19 masks. This is just openly satanic. And journalism. Journalists used to be, not all of them, but for the most part, cynical, funny men who like to drink booze and tell stories. Journalism is now dominated by woke women who gobble Xanax by the fistful and tell you about their mental health in great detail, continually, almost continuously, which brings us to the story of Gabriel Mack, formerly named as Mac McClelland. This is from Wiki. An American author and journalist from 2007 to 2012 was a staff reporter at Mother Jones, eventually in the position of human rights reporter. He has also written for the New York Times Magazine, Rolling Stone, and other publications. This Wikipedia entry gives evidence of being heavily and repeatedly edited. However, what's hilarious is that I'm looking at a picture of this man called Gabriel Mack, and they forgot to put in the post version of this person. Yeah, because it's clearly a woman. Okay. So this person has a talent for getting written about or writing about oneself, in a transgressive way. In the Washington Post a few years ago, he only spoke French. I only spoke English. And then we found Google Translate, I guess. Okay. From GQ, and this article is, 2 years old. There's a picture of this person. I'm going to call this person just this person. And I'm thinking this person now has short hair. It seems to be using a bronzer or some sort of getting a lot of tan and a deformed lip. Oh, of course, it's a ring in the lip. The end of straight, the end for America, and the end for me. Trigger warning. This is from GQ, which I had always believed to be a fashion magazine for men. But the following story contains graphic discussion of violent threats, sexual violence, hate crimes, child abuse, harassment, and suicidal ideation. It's the whole package, people. Okay, someone named Asha. How I came out of the closet was I wore a dress and fake boobs to school on the last night right before summer break during my sophomore year. Dressing that way, Easter, gender dysphoria, more. Yeah, okay. So the coming out story, okay. But it gets worse. It gets a lot worse. And even people that I would describe, let's say, as cynical journalists, were appalled by what happened this weekend. Because this person, Gabriel Mack, whatever this person was called before, is deranged and dangerously so. Here's a tweet storm by Zane Emma, or EZ. I'm not the world's best investigative journalist, but this appears to be the same person as the one on the cover of the New York Magazine. Starts with her covering the stories of atrocities against women and developing PTSD. It ends with him getting phalloplasty to get a huge penis. Okay? Because this is what cover story of what the New York Magazine. My penis myself. I didn't need a penis to be a man, but I needed one to be me. And there is a picture, full-size picture of this person who now has scraggly beard, very scraggly beard, and has had its breasts removed and is wearing Calvin Klein underwear with an enormous Johnson. Because that's what normal people do. Okay. Journalist Mac McClellan simulates own rape to combat her PTSD. Mother Jones reporter Mac McClellan witnessed some of the sexual atrocities committed in the aftermath of an earthquake that struck Haiti in 2010 and was so haunted by what she saw that she staged her own violent rape in order to get over it. Because that's something that people do. It rather reminds me of that woman, I believe her name was Emma Sulkowicz, who claimed to have been date raped, I believe at Columbia University. And for several years later, she carried a mattress around the campus and then made a movie in which she reenacts a brutal rape, because, of course, that's something a normal person would do, right? Emma Sulkowicz got a lot of attention for a long time. So Zane Emma continues, so let's unpack. A rising star, a gifted journalist, a beautiful young woman, then something happens. She begins to descend into mental illness. And there's a series of photographs of her, you know, throughout her career. And it's the kind of progression that you see. In fact, there's a meme around this. This is what I looked like when I graduated high school. This is what I looked like 6 months after entering university, 12 months, 18 months, whatever. And the last picture is, oh my God, the goggles do nothing. She develops PTSD after witnessing a rape in Haiti, the panic attacks, constant crying, and the violent thoughts she can't escape. Oh, and she wrote a book called Irritable Hearts, a PTSD love story. Goes into disturbing details about the impact, panic attacks, constant crying, and the violent thoughts she can't escape. She was so tortured by violent thoughts that she had rough sex as a form of therapy. Now, the journalists have been humoring this woman, or sorry, person, thing, whatever, for years and years and years. And how's that worked out? So to cure her secondary PTSD, witnessing a woman gets raped, she does what any woman in her place would do, of course. She stages her own rape. That was 10 years ago. Fast forward to 2019, the end of straight, the end of America, and the end of me. A trans therapist does not question this clearly traumatized, mentally ill woman. The trans therapist merely discloses the risks. The solutions are imperfect. But this warning is no barrier to this desperate person. Now, I don't, there is so much in this story, that I can't unsee. And I'm not recommending that you read it. It's just her description of going from a woman to a man and then setting up a rape and what that would entail given the change. The state of disarray this poor person in is self-evident to anyone unless you are a therapist, that is. I did not know until I started dismantling that femaleness that I thought if I wasn't a pretty girl, I was worthless. I'd been indoctrinated to believe that if you're going to be a person with a vagina, the most important thing is to be nice to look at. But she was nice to look at. But the life-saving transition must go on. Apparently, everything is going well, except none of her ex-boyfriends and friends want to have sex with her. Which brings us to today's cover in New York Magazine. None of the descent into mental illness is hinted at. The story appears to have been rewritten. Everything, apparently he always felt male, except for one thing. The bizarre ongoing theme of rape. We end right where we begin. This is for psychoanalysts to unpack New York Magazine. You need to do due diligence. Glamorizing one's descent into mental illness is irresponsible. This reporting will encourage many traumatized young women to self-harm. And we have another breakdown of this from Michael Tracy. See what he has to say. New York Magazine is exploiting for shock value a deeply mentally ill person. That's not speculation. The person has publicly chronicled their mental illness for years. The whole thing is extremely disturbing, especially if you're familiar with the author's background. New York Mag presents this as a sound reasoning from a mentally competent person. I don't even want to link to the article because it really is so disturbing and depressing on multiple levels. If there was anything that I'd learned in transitioning, it was that what was right for me was rarely what, according to my patriarchal, heterosexist, racist, capitalist acculturation, made sense, which obviously could only be to live as a sexually available, cute lady vessel capable of carrying white babies. Yeah, okay. Almost done here. Oh, yes. Here's a piece from Unheard. And yes, I like to use this phrase, Shiva Naipaul, universal mental retardation. Joan Smith writes, why is it important to know someone's birth sex? The conservative MP Carolyn Noakes, who chairs the Women and Equality Select Committee, evidently has no idea. Why would we want to? She asked during an interview on this morning's Today program. Where shall I even start? Maybe, and I'm just guessing wildly here, to avoid the wrong people being called for NHS screening programs. I've just had a routine mammogram, which I was offered because I am female. It would be an expensive waste of money to screen me for prostate cancer because, funnily enough, I don't have one. Then there are the prisons. Does Noakes really believe that court officials stand around at the end of a trial not wanting to offend convicted offenders by asking their birth sex and wondering where to send them? Oh, but I'd forgotten. If said rapist announces that he identifies as a woman, he may well end up sharing cells and bathrooms with actual women, regardless of how they feel about sharing intimate space with an individual with a penis. That's what happens when you ignore the distinction between sex and gender. One is a fact while the other is about someone's feelings and entirely subjective. It's jaw-dropping that Noakes and most of her committee appear not to understand the difference, but the problems can be traced all the way back to the 2004 Gender Recognition Act, an ill-considered piece of legislation that enshrined the confusion in law. In other words, if you're a man and say you're a woman or vice versa, you are, just like that. Nothing else needs to be proved or even asserted for that matter. I suppose, on the one hand, not having to actually have work done is a good thing because, once the work is done, you can't go back on it. On the other hand, the fact that this surgery is so horrific, the fact that you can claim to be of the opposite sex without getting it done means that there is going to be many, many, many more people who do this, which is destructive, to put it mildly. This is from Josephine Bartosh at the Mail on Sunday. Father Ted creator Graham Linehan claims trans zealots are forcing him out of the stage version of his own show because of his outspoken defense of women's rights. Yes, Graham Linehan has been very brave and has come into enormous trouble, and it has hurt him financially, and his wife is divorcing him, and all because he says that a man is a man and a woman is a woman, that a man cannot become a woman simply by claiming otherwise. The warnings from the production company became more insistent, Linehan said. After a while, I had a very funny meeting with a top public relations guy at the company. I'd hoped it might improve my image. Instead, he said, Graham, I have to tell you, there are some people in the office who won't work for you. In almost every company I've worked with, there are now young employees who are ferociously authoritarian. Activists have branded Linehan transphobic on social media. Pink News, an Alphabet People online magazine, has published more than 75 articles declaring him a bigot. Linehan has also been visited twice by the police after complaints from well-known transgender activists. In an article for the Mail on Sunday last year, he wrote, we're in a world where male sexual offenders in bad wigs assault female prisoners, where rape centers are defunded because they won't admit men, and where a bloke in a full beard tells school children that he's a lesbian, and we're informed with venomous aggression that we may not talk about any of it. But I'm going to end today with some good news. And this is from Raymond Wolf at a LifeSite. Dateline, Dallas, a top gender clinic in Texas that provided dangerous experimental transgender drugs to children, has been shut down after months of pushback by conservative activists and local parents. Dallas Children's Medical Center and UT Southwestern Medical Center quietly shuttered the program, known as Gender Education and Care, Interdisciplinary Support, late last month. In a statement to media outlets, Children's Medical Center and UT Southwestern said that they will continue to accept new patients for evaluations of gender dysphoria, but will no longer offer transgender hormone drugs. Yes, so some good news. Let's take a final look at the chat. Are we having a Music Monday Tuesday? No, we're having a Music Monday tomorrow. I thought I wouldn't be able to do justice to the book if I did it today. So, yeah. The History of Pop Music by Bob Stanley. Very enjoyable. Thank you for your kind words, Don Willis. And Media Hits. Media Hits says public universities in the U.S. allow trans to use whatever bathroom, locker rooms, no questions asked. Chogokin 666 says, I'm being put through the ringer to get a test booster. I'm sorry to hear that. Mental illness, plain and simple. Yeah, well, at some point, someone should have said, an editor, say, or a publisher, or men she knew, just stop talking about this, okay? It's not good for you, and we don't want to hear it. But I just gathered today that, young men, well, yeah, that's the way to impress a girl is just listen to her derangement at exhaustive length. Hello to Quachulango. Munchausen syndrome at a cultural level. Volvodenia says Spider-Man No Way Home was a good movie. Quachulango says, funny story, one of my top 10 Christmas memories is playing Ding Dong Dash on my then neighborhood Harvey Weinstein. Dude came to the door at 7 p.m. in a robe looking like a sleazebag. Early 80s. This is a woman I used to work with at the University of British Columbia. And she said that one of the librarians who worked in our building, she lived in the same neighborhood. And that one day the librarian's husband, he knocked at the door. And she was young, I think teenager then. And she opened the door and he was just wearing a robe and slippers. And he said, do you have a drink? And she said, like water? No, a drink. Golly, it must be pretty desperate when you start canvassing the neighborhood. I don't even want to. Yeah, the mutilation that was involved in this process that this person, Mac or whatever. Ooh. Listening to the woman on the first date is a good move. If she talks bad about more than one last boyfriend, that's a red flag, says Media Hits. Yes, Benjamin Stein once wrote, if you're taking a woman to a restaurant, pay particular attention to how she treats the waiters, the staff, because that's how she's going to treat you. Okay. I will be back tomorrow, and it is December the 22nd. But despite it being Wednesday, I will do a Music Monday. So we're going to have the movie. It's not a movie, actually, on Thursday. It's a 1981 SCTV Christmas special. And I'm going to be reading a Christmas-themed short story by Willa Cather on Friday, which is Christmas Eve. Thank you all for tuning in. I will be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you like the show and would like to make a donation to the live stream, my PayPal account is linked to kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations to the live stream may be made directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.